Greetings, Doug. We're back,
G'day, Tim.
We're back, and with in POG form.
In POG form, yeah. I like it.
Only the millennials will get that,
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, that's half the topic, right?
and that's pretty much us, and pretty well anyone in our generation.
Yeah.
I'm of the elder millennial persuasion.
Yeah, I mean, you got a few years on me, but I feel like we're spiritually in the same
Totally.
same era. Yeah.
Totally,
Well, you're right on the cusp, right?
definitely.
Yeah.
I'm definitely closer to X than
Yeah.
Then
But then you
millennial.
took the millennial Spotify music test the other day, right?
Yeah.
Or like the what generation are you?
Yeah.
You didn't get boomer, so that's great. Because apparently, like, basically people your age and older now are boomers if you ask fucking Gen Z. Anyone
Yeah.
that's older than them is a boomer.
yeah, too true.
Yeah.
It is too true. But you know, we had a tuna flicker chat.
Yep.
And as much as we love having a chat, we've wiped the deck of,
It's
of that.
new podcast time.
Yeah. And welcome to the PitchShift podcast.
That's the soft pitch for the name. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think PitchShift is the right vibe. Do you want to explain the concept?
Yeah, for sure. So
Concept feels like a really shitty word to like.
yeah, like it's planned
It's a
in some
high
sort of way.
concept
Yeah.
podcast.
Well, I think it all stems back to, we found a study that was basically, boil it all down, kind of says that, at age 31, people generally start abandoning the idea of finding new things.
Yeah.
And, specifically music. And it's about discovery of new music at the age of 31. And I think there's probably a bunch of reasons that exists. And without going into the specifics of that entire, study, I imagine there's a bunch of factors that go into it. Like one would be that, people's priorities change as they, get older. Obviously,
Absolutely.
that's, as far as, having children age goes, it's a bit late, but it's probably on the, as the...
It ties in with a life change for a lot of people. Also,
Totally.
the parallel study to the one when we were talking about this the other day, I thought you were referring to the one that I'd heard that back when I used to work in radio for a little while, the marketing and sales team there, they went and did some training, and mate ours truck went and did some training and came back with a tidbit about study that was done about like people's emotional center for music. And so that's usually your emotional center for who you are when it comes to the music that you like is formed between the age of about like 13 and 16.
Yeah,
It's that like early adolescent sort of thing. And so, obviously you'll discover more music after that. And like, people in their 20s will still be discovering new things. But I think if you take the first nugget that is the music that you discovered when you were 14 that blew your fucking mind and you're like, whoa, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, it's all part of that identity creation.
Even if you leave that behind in your music taste as you go on, like you'll find that when you get to that 31 that's in the other study, that you might go back to those older things and find comfort in that.
Yeah.
And then go, oh, well, that's all I really need. And you do find yourself in the trap of like, oh man, you remember when we saw that band when we were like, 16 or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was incredible. And you really stop making new pathways for music.
Neural pathways, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think the other thing as well is like there's like a bit of a mental element of it as well, in that, a lot of people, and I'm one of them, was, coming up to the age of 30, I really started freaking out about like, I'm going to be old now. And, I think the very specific age, 31, comes down to like people freak out at 29 going into 30, thinking like, oh, I've got to double down and be young and I've got to be discovering new music and all that sort of stuff. They spend that 30 year still being that, like, I'm still young, I'm discovering new things, I'm with it. And then 31 hits and they sort of go, oh, well, doesn't really matter anymore. I'm in my 30s. I'm well into my 30s
I'm
now.
in my 30s now. Yeah. It's like 29 is I'm almost 30 and 31 is I'm almost 40.
Yeah, totally. And by the time you're 40, as I'm 41, but you don't care.
Well, they also talk about like the curve of like the way we perceive time is different, right? So the thing I read the other day was that at 21, in terms of like how you perceive time and your life, you've lived half your life at 21. Like by the time you get to 21, there is a notable sort of perception of time with people that like, 21, like they don't feel like they've lived a bunch because they've gone through school, they were growing up, they were developing who they are and everything. And then you get to 21 and you kind of think like, oh shit, like my 20s are it. And then after that, I'm 30. And then like at 40, I may as well be dead. Like it's just all, it feels like it's all coming up way too soon.
Well, that's rough.
But what I mean is like the people's perception of time. And so like as you get older, the other thing is that the reason time feels like it's going faster is it's because of the way that you perceive time and the fact that 5 years feels like it'll go past really quickly, but when you were younger it didn't, because like time is much slower, you've got all this new stimulus, you're taking a bunch in. As you get older and your priorities start to come into play, you find yourself like for me, when it comes to music discovery, I find myself less interested in that. I have to put more effort into it because it's very easy to get swept up in like, I just got to get through this week. I've just got to get through this month. And then you wish away like an entire year and you didn't really stop to smell the roses, so to speak.
All this to say that, what we are wanting to do with this podcast is that if you are in that grind, in that groove of, just getting by, or, your priorities are all of these other things, it's like, can we provide an easy filter for you to discover new things? Like if you like this, that, was made up, a big chunk of your music identity back in the day, you might like this.
Yeah.
And here's the lane that occupied, and here's a bunch of bands that are now, or artists that are now sitting in that lane and are doing, just similar things to what you used to like back in the day.
The lane concept is something I really liked that you'd explained to me a while ago, that sort of like in music media, the idea that, using pop as an example, I think it was like Pink, right?
Yeah.
Everyone knows who Pink is, and there is all of this persona that goes with her that's like she's got the, not at the outset necessarily, but now she's like got the circus sort of side of her. She's got like punk rock kind of vibes, but in a pop,
in a mainstream,
mainstream artist,
sort of consumable way.
Yeah, and so like the idea of the lanes being that like, well, Pink is that persona right now, and then maybe in the future there'll be someone else that has a very similar sort of persona that is their own person that gets really big, but at the moment the lane is occupied.
Yeah.
And so I love that concept that, it doesn't seem logically like a thing. It's like, well, yeah, there's lots of artists doing lots of things and blah, 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 but like there's usually in that sort of space only room for one enormous artist.
Yeah, broadly. Yeah. In that sort of like broad, everyone knows, if you were to say the name of that artist or band,
they immediately picture the
even
image
your mum
and the persona.
knows,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at that level, exactly. And so you see it happen with like, there was like the Beyonce, again, just with pop people, it's easy to lean on, like Beyonce and Rihanna. They're, two big sort of like people of like women of color in music that have very different vibes and are very easily like told apart. But there might have been at the time other people that were coming up that had similar vibes to them that didn't quite hit because the lane was already occupied, like what Rihanna was doing and what Beyonce were doing.
Whitney Houston occupied it.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's that thing of in the genres we listen to, it's very different. There's lots of bands doing lots of things, but I heard Will Putney the other day, the music producer that produces Knocked Loose.
Yep.
His ethos when it comes to heavy music is that if a band comes to him because he produced Knock Loose, which have this very signature mosh sound, they come to him and they're just like, all right,
make us sound like Knock Loose.
Here's our demos, and they've just written songs exactly like Knock Loose, and they want to sound like that. He goes, I already do Knock Loose.
Correct.
It's not an exclusive, I'm not allowed to, but it's like that lane for me of music production is full. I feel very comfortable there. There's other things I want to explore. So it's not, I won't do it because there shouldn't be more bands. that sound like that, but it's like you can get that from somebody else.
Yeah, I remember this very thing being talked about a bunch of years ago. I can't remember in reference to what. The thing that keeps coming to mind is Dead Letter Circus and you know them, or maybe it was Cog, potentially not at that time not wanting to work with Forrester Saville. At that time, they have since, but you know, at that time, you know, Carnival had used him, Dead Letter had used him, you know, Butterfly Effect had used him, and it was sort of like, you know, let's define ourselves differently. We're already in the same family, you know, of bands, and it was also, you know, it just. You never want to be, if it's also an attitude thing, I think, is that like Will Putney also doesn't want to work with an artist that is simply wanting to be an also ran or a B grade or a B level of, you know, or a clone of his sound, you know, and it's not interesting to him as a producer.
It's not interesting to him, and the other thing is, it's like, yeah, look, mosh bands, like, for example, that genre, a lot of those bands will sound the same as, like, you know, deathcore bands and everything. A lot of them will all sound the same because they're in the same genre and they're doing what is largely formulaic music, right? Like, there is a formula to writing these sort of things. It's not that they can't be creative, but what happens is if you've got 5 bands that all have exactly the same production, then it is hard to tell them apart. And if all their vocalists sound the same, blah, blah, blah. So I definitely get his ethos of like, come to me with similar songs, but let's try something different. Let's give you a signature sound. And if they don't want that, then what's the point?
Agreed. And I think also the danger you have in something like that, especially if, you know, maybe a producer's working for a label or something like that, where it's kind of how you end up with your Nickelbacks and your Creeds. And that Nickelback and Creed, the story of that really goes back to Nirvana.
Yeah.
And if you look at like what happened with Nirvana and the whole grunge movement, you know, you've got, you know, your Nirvanas and then your Soundgardens, your Alice in Chains, you know, all of, you know, your Mudhoney, all of those sorts of bands.
Yeah.
Every label at that time was signing as many bands that sounded like that as possible. And the 1 in 10 would pay for the 9, right?
Yeah.
And so it was just a numbers game.
Well, they also understand like the lanes system as well of
Correct.
Like you got to throw a bunch of darts at the wall and the one that sticks, that's going to be the big money maker, and they would probably, once they have their big one, shirk the other ones.
Correct.
And just focus on that one.
Yeah. And then you get, you know, so far down the line of everyone trying to sign so many of those bands and whatever, that they then start trying to, you know, model bands into what they want it to sound like.
Yeah.
And you get further and further down the line and producers trying to reproduce that sound and you end up with, you know, that sort of proto grunge but really clean production.
Yeah.
That you end up with Nickelback and Creed.
Same thing happened in the 2000s with Machine. So the producer Machine that did, and now I'm probably going to get this wrong, but this is generally the vibe that I got at the time was, I believe it was Architects went to America and they recorded like Daybreakers or whatever, that like a 2008, 2010, maybe Hollow Crown. They went and recorded with Machine, this producer in America, who Will Putney apparently had like everything he learnt from working with Machine.
Gotcha.
So very similar sort of styles, but totally different sounds. But so Architects had their breakout album that was recorded with him and had a particular sound. And so then a band like Amity Affliction, for example, went, we want to get some of what they got going on. And they released Severed Ties, which again, this is the old man in me being like, I really liked that. That's what I liked. But at the time I was like, oh man, I don't listen to any other music that sounds like this album. Like I really like this. And then they went over and recorded with him and they came back with Youngbloods, and it was a way more polished and mechanical sound that did them really well and people got really into it, and it's probably one of the best things they could have done.
Yeah.
But straight after that, there was 2 or 3 other bands, like Australian bands, American bands. I just started hearing this production sound on fucking everything.
Yeah.
And they were all bands that I was like, I really enjoy this, but now that it's got this same like copy paste production on it,
no longer interested.
I'm no longer interested. I'm hearing too much of it. It's like the episode of South Park where Stan one day realizes that all music sounds like shit. The analogy that being when you get old, music sounds like shit. That'd be a good reference for this podcast.
Totally.
But so literally, like they'd put music on, like he'd wake up to the radio in the morning and it'd be the announcer like saying what the song is. Then it comes on and it's just a bunch of farts and shit sounds on the thing, and you get like what it sounds like to him. And then everyone that's talking to him start like they are talking in fart, and he just realizes like, oh, as you get older, like everything just is shitty and sounds like shit. And so circling back to our point, that's what the podcast is about. Is it doesn't have to be that way.
Agreed. Yeah. And so, you don't have to also just take what you're fed. So like whatever, is put in front of you, whether you're still listening to radio or whether that's, maybe you're on TikTok, maybe it's whatever Spotify or whatever streaming service that you have is serving up to you algorithmically, you also don't have to just accept that. You can go searching. And I know it's a little time consuming. And I guess what we are asking people is like, you kind of do have to make a bit of effort.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is trying to take a little bit of the effort out of that by being a filter of, we have these brains full of information that we love info dumping on people. I don't know about you. I'm pretty certain you're a similar kind of spicy brain to me in that I love a great info dump and I don't realize I'm necessarily doing it until I'm like, oh God, I'm doing it. This person doesn't
I'm
didn't ask for this.
I'm diagnosed ADHD and we do run in packs apparently.
Yeah.
But I definitely that's why we have a podcast and if no one listens to this, we don't really give a shit. This is more just an opportunity like at the other podcast to info dump. But what I will say where I want to set what we're doing apart from other things that I've heard. There's other podcasts that I listen to of, friends and stuff where it's very much music news. Yeah. And it's like new releases. So like people will send them new releases.
I've done that at least.
Well, your background being PR is to be promoting new music.
Yeah. But I also found as well, like when we were doing that podcast, the music news thing and brand new music every week, it's so fleeting. Like by the time you've released it, that was last week. That was last week's music.
Yeah.
And it's gone. And it just, it's great to be on the front foot and be on the cusp of all this brand new stuff. And it's great to be on top of it, but it's topical for a week and then it's gone. Such is the release cycle these days.
Well, that's what I'd like to sort of to do with this, ideating on the fly is rather than it being us being like, hey, this new stuff came out, you should check it out.
Oh yeah.
The vibe here very much is like about sharing our music discovery and talking about, the lanes thing. So there's bands that I love from when I was a teenager where I've found there being a real, like, they call it like revival core.
Yep.
So there's this, MySpace era post-hardcore thing that's getting popular again and coming back. And there's
nostalgia for that, which feels so odd as the age we are. Is like,
exactly.
That seems like yesterday to us.
Live long enough to see it become popular again.
Yeah.
But it's really like it's a bit of a filtered down thing, I guess, through like older brothers and sisters and stuff. And what we were talking about earlier,
my cousins,
before the podcast was like the fact that, if the school bus discovery of like you're on the school bus and someone gives you the headphones, they go, wait, check this out. And you listen to it and you go, whoa, what the fuck is that? Like I haven't heard anything like that. Or like, oh, that's like that other band I like, but this is way better. And you'd get music discovery through more of what I described as like a charcoal filter rather than the algorithm funnel. So it's, you're somewhere through a guitar magazine or like, some
Blunt or something like that.
Yeah, they get like a compilation or whatever like that. One of your mates someone's told someone about something that's got to them and then they've read it in this other thing and they've gone, oh, I'm going to check this music out. And then by the time it gets to you, it's passed through this charcoal filter of like, will my mate like this? You know, there's a status thing when you're a teenager of like, you know, if I get to show the cool new music to my mate, then like we're going to be better friends, and like, and then he's going to like what I like.
That rings really true for me in that, you know, and I don't know if this was still the case for you once you went to high school, because you graduated what year?
2007.
I graduated in 2000. So were you still taking, I know MP3 players were definitely a thing by the time you were in.
Man,
so I had Discmans. We would take CDs and Discmans to school.
Yeah,
that was our thing, and we'd burn CDs.
Yeah,
compilation CDs.
Yep.
And I've two very vivid memories. One of someone showing me music, and then me going, "Well, I want to be like that person. She was so cool."
Yeah,
and she showed me this great music, and I was like, "Oh God, I want to be that person." It was quite a big part of me going like, I now want to be the one that tells people about new things.
Yeah.
Was this moment. And I had my CD player and my Discman, and I had bought from Dick Smith at the time, I had bought one of those things where you plug it in and then it was a splitter into two headphone outputs.
That's the fancy version of like just sharing a headphone each.
Correct.
Yeah.
We both had stereo. Yeah. And so
but could your device keep up with the fact that the splitting the signal made it quieter? Because I had a CD player that like even when it was maxed out wouldn't keep up with like the sound of the bus.
Oh, okay. No, this was in class.
Oh, right.
So we didn't have to compete with the bus.
Yeah.
We'd be sitting at our 2-person desk, and we'd have the CD player in the middle. We'd have our headphones in, and we'd be doing our work, right?
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember, so this person, Rebecca White, who I went to primary school and high school with, grade 11, so 1999, showed me the very first System of a Down album.
Yeah, right.
And I just remember Sugar coming on, and just this bizarre voice going, "Sugar!"
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, what is that? And then, and just like, just going like, whoa. And just like these bizarre voices, 2 voices in a band.
Yeah.
And, you know, both of them being really wacky and, you know, talking about mushrooms and all sorts of shit. And then she showed me Sweet Pea, which I thought was really funny because it's spelt, you know, like a hotel suite, not sweet like sugar. And P, not PEA, PEE. I was like, oh, that's quite funny. So like, you know, 16-year-old, you know, it's very much rearing its head there.
Very much. I mean, not to harp on the ADHD thing, but I feel like System of a Down was, for an ADHD kid, was a great discovery of music because you get a little bit of every genre. You get like things that are punny and funny, but then you also get things that are very like serious, like Prison Song and stuff like that. So you're getting this like huge spectrum, and like I feel like System of a Down is, you know how they say like, oh, this band is like the gateway band to like this genre or whatever like that. System of a Down was the gateway band to music. I think if you weren't really into music and then someone showed you that and you did dig it, you suddenly were into a lot of different shit.
Yeah, it opened up a lot of weird shit too.
My wife never listened to any heavy music until she met me, and she used to love like Red Hot Chili Peppers like Thirsty Merc was one of her favorite bands growing up. She grew up in a family where her mum was a singing teacher. Everybody in the family sung. You'd hang out with them on like, we'd go to the beach on the weekend, and in the car everyone would be singing 5-part harmonies of Beatles songs and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then
really clean, proper harmonies and all that sort of stuff would have been really important to them.
She listened to rock stuff, but she didn't listen to heavy stuff. Yeah. And then when System of a Down came out, like I didn't even have to show her System of a Down. She, you know, they were big enough.
Because it's an interesting voice, Doug.
She loves
it's an interesting
his voice and the harmonies, and there's just the musicality of that band. Like even if you don't like the heavy bits, all of the heavy bits are totally justified by the rest of it if you don't like heavy stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And like we went to see them at Soundwave the year that they played with Slipknot, and she still says that's like probably the best show she's ever seen.
I love that.
And she's an opera student now.
Yeah.
So like
I think that's interesting to Beck because that's a very interesting voice with a massive range. but not perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
And then, but by virtue of that, talking about music discovery, there's the nostalgia part of music discovery, but then there's also the breaking of genres by like people showing. So the school bus thing, my example of your listening to System was my mate showing me a Metallica song, like A Justice for All at the hard courts at the school, gave me an earphone, he's like, listen to this, and I hadn't listened to anything heavy, so like that started me on to like thrash metal and stuff. 2 minutes into A Justice for All, I'm like, so when does the song start, because there's no vocals? Like I don't understand what you're showing me, but it wasn't challenging, it was just like new. And then like a month later, he shows me a Dillinger Escape, like one of the heaviest Dillinger Escape Plan songs, most technical mathcore shit I've ever heard. And I was like in grade 10, and he's put it in my ear, and I've gone like, oh, I feel tired now. Because like I've never heard anything like that before, and I don't understand it. But I wouldn't have been into, I probably never would have even met you probably if he hadn't shown me this heavier music and got me into the idea of bands.
Well, that kind of segues into also what I want to share in this like very first podcast as well, is like just kind of getting back to what, you know, our roots music wise and where what we've done. Because I think the unifying thing that you and I have in common is that we're both from regional rural towns. I'm from Rockhampton, you're from Gladstone, or the outskirts of Gladstone. You grew up on a farm outside of town,
which made me really want to be in bands.
Yeah,
and should get the fuck out of the really quiet place.
Yeah, and you know, we both spent time in the and I guess you know, you kind of had a few examples before you, like Truckee and Penny both putting on shows in Gladstone, and I had inspiration. I had a friend, Hayden, who was putting on shows, and it really came down to, and Craig Zonka as well, and it really came down
Shout out Enlightened by Darkness. Hayden's band was like one of those bands that was a local band that made me realize, like, oh man, like even as a local band, you can be fucking incredible.
Yeah, exactly, and 99% of the drive of that band came from Hayden too. You know, other, musically they were all contributing, but
so commonly one dude that wants it real bad.
Yeah, and all of those things inspired, I guess, yourself and myself into, like, we both went, well, the bands that we want to see come to town are not coming to town.
Yeah.
So we're going to make that happen. And so we both had this drive of, we want to expose new music to people.
Yeah.
And that's via the medium of live music. And that's obviously driven by a love of discovering new music and then wanting to see it live.
Exactly.
And so, I think that driver is kind of, and then I guess as well, like then going on, we've both chosen to work in the music industry in various, ways. Like you've been a muso for that whole time,
covers musician,
as well as
in
original artist as well. And whether that's in bedroom projects like with your friend Brady, and whether that ever sees the light of day or not, it doesn't matter. Like you guys have written and recorded and all of that stuff just for your own personal artistic satisfaction.
That's another thing I think is interesting about the music discovery thing, as well as you get older, that because time seems to go so much quicker, it's easier to put aside your musical projects you're working on just as much as it kind of feels to me sometimes like I only have space for one or the other. I only really have space in my brain for finding new music or writing new music, and not necessarily both at the same time.
And what's really brutal about that is that, and of course you're not consuming new music to potentially parrot it in your music, but if you're also not listening to new music, you're not being inspired by different things.
It's fuel.
It's fuel for that. So it really, if you're creating music, you really need to be discovering music as well.
You end up with an echo chamber. I think when it comes to discovering music, and like what we've been talking about is the new music discovery, if you're not actively doing that, then you get an echo chamber of your tastes of what you like.
Yeah.
But then also I've heard comedians say before where they go on tour for a couple of years or they're just playing spots in cities and stuff, and they are so focused on getting as many spots or getting to as many places as possible.
And what, just doing the same material?
And well, it just like they're trying to come up with new material, but they realize over a couple of years, all they've ever seen on the road is they get they drive to, or they get the plane to where they're going, they get to the room, they just conk out for the day, they go and they do their late night show, then they like go and get a slice of pizza and they go back, but they're not spending their days that they have free going and doing things. They're just spending it either sleeping or hanging out in the hotel room.
Yeah.
And they get to a point after a couple of years where they go like, oh, I don't have any new material or any new good stories because I haven't been experiencing anything.
Yeah.
My life has been to fly here, do show, go hotel, fly here, go like, and so they need to actually, when they get to a city, go like, oh, I'm going to go out and see the place, and then maybe they'll have a weird experience with a stranger or see something cool or whatever that will give them new material, but without actively going out into the world.
Yeah,
you can find yourself echo chambering a lot, and comedy
and
music
same
are
goes
very
with
similar.
music consumption. Like, you know, if you are only hanging out with people who are also not in discovery mode, then you're going to talk, and potentially you're going to, if you're still hanging out with, you know, the people and not to say that you can't have lifelong friends, but, you know, if you're still hanging out with the same people that you hang out with 20 years ago and only those people, you are going to just be talking about, remember that time, or, you know, talking about the same bands, talking about, you know, the same things over and over.
It is something I had to pull myself up on when I was probably 27, I think I was. I realized that we would have parties and stuff, but at the parties at my house, we would talk about the things we did between 18 and 21. Because at that point, people were starting to settle down, get houses, have kids, blah, blah, blah. And so they'd come to hang out and we'd have a couple of afternoon beers or whatever, and we'd reminisce about the times that were less than 10 years ago while we were still in our 20s. And one day I was like, oh, what the fuck? That's gross. Like I am passing up new opportunities to talk about old things. Why aren't I focusing on making new memories? Why at this party aren't we doing something that we'll talk about in 5 years? Because I realize now I don't have any stories of like between about 25 and 28.
Right, because you were just doing I
don't have any. Remember when we did that?
You were looking back, not forward.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all this to say, and I think like that's something that I'm going to probably say a lot, is all this to say, is that, you know, we want to help people get out of that funk.
Yep.
And, you know, and there will be episodes where it's primarily about music, but I think, you know, similar concepts exist for other media, whether that's, or even just like things that you do in your life, things that you know, get stuck in a funk, and like, how do you change your attitude? So the PitchShift name, I think, comes with the idea of like shifting your view, shifting your point of view, shifting your, you know, the way that you operate.
Exactly. And the format that we want to keep, for one, is about 30 minutes, so we're going to wrap it up shortly. But the format that we kind of want to keep is of bringing like some new music that we've found during the week or whatever, or like a band that is relevant that we want to talk about, and less about music news and very topical stuff, but more about like, you know, connections we have to music discovery. And hey, there's a band that is the Revival Core I mentioned before that sounds like MySpace era stuff, but they brought an album out in 2020. They're a new band that's only been around a few years. They brought out an album that uncannily sounds like something I loved when I was younger, but it's got a different edge to it. And it's piqued my interest because it gives me a certain amount of nostalgia, but like I could just listen to the old thing, except this new thing is fucking great. And now I get to make some new memories and some new connections with music that isn't the people my age that made it, but it's the people younger than us, or that have been in bands forever, that are finally starting that band they always wanted to. Yeah, and you know, you've dropped a lot of the airs and graces that you cared about, like thinking you know that you like, oh, we've got to be cool. The reason that I used to put shows on was because I saw something you said to me years ago was you got to see it to be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've lived by that idea
Yeah.
because you guys, you and our mates in Epidemic Over that were a bit older than me when I was in high school.
Yeah.
I went to a Battle of the Bands where Epidemic Over played before us, and we were 17. We'd never played a show before. They'd played a bunch of like cover shows. They'd started this new material, and they were in their like 23, 24, I guess. And we stood there and we watched them. We went, oh fuck, we got to go up after that. Like, oh, and it wasn't that they were a pro tier band yet, but we were looked up at that and we're like, man, those guys are gods.
Yeah.
They've already got all this together, and why the fuck would we get up? But then the more we saw them play and hung out with them, the more we're like, oh, like this is cool. We want to do this. And everyone my age that was coming out of high school that was thinking about starting a band did.
Yeah.
Because they're like, it can be done.
It can be done.
And
exactly.
Then as I started to run shows because I had a band that I wanted to play with, and there wasn't a way to play shows. I wanted my band to play, and there was nowhere. So I started putting shows on, and I went to a Battle of the Bands, and we were 23, and there was a bunch of 16-year-olds up there playing like Enter Sandman and nailing it. And I was like, I don't know who these kids are, but I want to put them on these shows because this is rad. And like I had someone do that for me. I want to be able to do that for someone else. And the sad thing was that by the time they reached uni age and left town, there wasn't really any
that next
new
gen.
bands.
Yeah.
There was a gap in the generation. So
Yeah.
anyway, we should wrap it up. But that is very much the idea is like, I want to champion the fact that just because there's things that you like from when you were younger and nothing new really compares. It definitely does.
It
You should go
definitely
out and
does.
look.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
I think that's it. Let's record another one in exactly the same clothes in the same place and see you next week.